I wish to offend my emperor. Last night at the palace banquet, I drank too much. Afterward, I discussed official matters with General Alexandar Wang. Somehow, the conversation drifted to the bed. In short, when I woke up with my clothes in disarray, my hangover still pounding, the headache hadn't faded. Alexandar Wang was already leaning against the headboard, his sword cradled in his arms. He didn't speak, just stared at me. That wolf-cub gaze made my heart seize. I forced a laugh. "I'm sure you understand, General. This was just an accident." Alexandar Wang lifted an eyebrow. To my surprise, he smiled. "Then what do you intend?" I tested the waters. "You've earned great merit in battle. Last night was rather intense, but I've also seen what you can do. How about this? I'll grant you a good marriage, and I'll compensate you with 100 taels of gold. What do you say?" "You've already taken my chastity," he said. "And now you want me to marry someone else?" Alexandar Wang let out a cold laugh. The next instant, his sword was pressed to my throat. "You have only two choices. Either kill me or marry me." To be honest, my history with Alexandar Wang didn't begin yesterday. By rights, he shouldn't have been this furious. But in the eyes of the world, I was the emperor, a man. And the Wang family he came from, 3 generations back, had all been Great Zhao's famed battlefield commanders, their reputation spotless. I wrapped my chest, straightened my rumpled clothes, and got out of bed, one hand pressed to my forehead. Alexandar Wang was already standing by the window. "Since you want me to take responsibility," I said, smoothing the wrinkles from my front panel inch by inch before looking up at him, "then wait a little. And what happened today? Don't let it get out for now. I have my own plans." Alexandar Wang looked at me without speaking. His eyes had the sharpness honed on the battlefield. Maybe it was my imagination, but I almost saw a trace of blood in them. After a long while, he finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, his gaze icy. I wouldn't dare disobey. "But, Vivian Zhou, 3 years ago, I truly thought you were dead." He swept his eyes over me again, tugged his lips into a self-mocking curve, then left without looking back. The sunlight outside was scorching. I stood at the bedchamber doorway, watching his retreating figure. A sudden pain stabbed through my chest. I pressed a hand to my heart and bent over. I remembered the upheaval from 3 years ago. Back then, I was Great Zhou's beloved princess. Father and mother took me and my twin brother out in disguise. We ran into mountain bandits. They didn't want money. They wanted lives. Father didn't even have time to finish a sentence before his head was taken in a single stroke. At dusk, I crawled out of the blood-soaked ground. I dragged myself forward, inch by inch, until I met the carriage of Stella, the Marquise of Valor's legitimate daughter. From that day on, Princess Vivian Zhao was dead. And I became the crown prince who had survived by sheer luck, the new emperor of Great Zhou. The court was full of undercurrents. To keep me safe, aside from Stella, who saved me, no one knew my true identity. Not even Alexandar Wang, and not even Nolan Ning, Prince Huayan's heir, my fiancé when I was still a princess. He had been my brother's study companion. We grew up together, childhood sweethearts. I loved Nolan for 6 full years. Father doted on me and issued an edict to grant the marriage, just as I wished. But after I ascended the throne, the first thing I did was revoke that edict in the name of the new emperor and grant Nolan another marriage instead. That night, I saw no one. I sat alone in the imperial study until dawn. By the flickering candlelight, I seemed to see my 17-year-old self. I lifted the richly patterned hem of my dress and ran toward Nolan without hesitation. He smiled and opened his arms to me. My brother and Alexandar Wang stood behind him, yet I couldn't make out their expressions. But now, my heart was full of riddles and hatred. I could no longer wear beautiful skirts. I could no longer be an innocent princess. And I could never marry Nolan again. At yesterday's palace banquet, Nolan entered the palace with his new wife. I had chosen her myself, a well-born young lady, carefree and sheltered. Her eyes were clear and bright, lively and innocent, just like I had been 3 years ago. Nolan held her hand as they came forward to pay their respects. When he rose, his gaze swept across my face. A dazed look flickered in his eyes. I knew it well. He was thinking of Vivian Zhou, dead for 3 years now. When the banquet began, I sat high in the main seat. I had just lifted my cup when a eunuch guarding outside rushed in, breathless. "Emperor, General Alexandar Wang has returned to the capital. He is outside the hall requesting an audience. I froze, then stood abruptly. Admit him. Moments later, Alexandar Wang strode into the hall in black, a long sword still hanging at his waist. He saluted and lifted his head. His cold gaze swept over my face. When it paused on the scar between my brows, it lingered for a heartbeat. Perhaps the border winds had tempered him. He was leaner, but sharper. He knelt in the hall, yet his back was ramrod straight. He looked like a drawn blade, bare and lethal. I lowered my eyes to avoid his gaze, then raised them again. "You've had a hard journey, General. Take a seat." After several rounds of wine, Alexandar Wang suddenly approached with his cup. In that instant, I thought of 3 years ago. After the nightmare in the capital outskirts, he rode back at full speed. He knelt before Vivian Zhao's spirit tablet and didn't say a word. I lowered my voice to offer a few words of comfort. Alexandar Wang snapped his head around, eyes red, and stared at me like a blade. He said, word by word, "Emperor, that was your own sister." When I came back to myself, Alexandar Wang was already standing before me. I drew a deep breath. "General, you haven't returned to the capital in 3 years. Why come back so suddenly today?" "Has the Emperor forgotten?" he asked. "In 3 days, it will be Vivi's death anniversary." I went still. A sharp pain bloomed in my chest. I hid my trembling fingertips in my sleeve and asked softly, "General, do you hate me?" A cold laugh, edged with mockery, reached my ears. Alexandar Wang said nothing. He drained his cup, expression blank, then flung the green jade cup to the floor and let it shatter. Then he turned and left. And after that, I saw Nolan and his wife below, perfectly in step, affectionate, close. The sourness in my chest grew heavier, and without realizing it, I drank a few more cups. When the banquet ended, officials filed out in small groups. I watched Alexandar Wang's back. On a sudden impulse, I called after him, "General, I have important matters to discuss with you." Alexandar Wang hated me. I knew that. He took me for my brother. He believed I had done nothing to find the real murderer of my sister, all to secure the throne. As for why he hated me for Vivian Zhou's death, I didn't want to think about it any further. In the past, I'd always felt Alexandar Wang didn't like me much. Often, when he saw me carrying a food box to bring sweets to Nolan, he would frown and watch me in silence. I was a kind-hearted princess. I never held grudges. Even then, I would still offer him a piece, and every time he would refuse mercilessly. "Princess, I don't like sweets." Yet here, in the bedchamber, I must have been too drunk. Staring at the red bean cake in his hand, I said, acid in my voice, "Doesn't General dislike sweets?" And then he pulled me into his arms. He leaned against my shoulder. His warm fingertips brushed my forehead and stopped on the slightly raised scar. In Alexandar Wang's drunken voice, a note of tenderness surfaced. Carefully, close to my ear, he asked, "Vivi, does it hurt?" By moonlight, I saw his strikingly handsome face, carved into cold sharpness by the pale light. High cheekbones, deep eyes like still water, a straight nose. Shadow and light sliced across his features, making every line cleaner. His lips were, as always, pale, nearly bloodless. It made me want to kiss him. I lost control at once. I yanked at his belt, parted his loose collar, and thrust my hand inside. Alexandar Wang bit his lip and let out a muffled groan. His Adam's apple bobbed. When I bent to bite it, a thin red mark bloomed over his collarbone. I climbed over him and called his name, no longer bothering to keep my voice down. "Alexandar Wang." His whole body went rigid. Then he held me tighter. The rain grew urgent. The wind tousled the flowers hidden in our clothes. Only when the sky began to pale did we finally sink into a heavy sleep. After Alexandar Wang left, I went to the imperial study to discuss affairs. We'd barely exchanged a few words when David Li came in to report. "Emperor, General Alexandar Wang requests an audience." Why was he back again? David Li went out and let him in. Grand Tutor Pai, who had been standing before me, turned his head and suddenly cried out, "General, what is this?" My eyelid twitched. I looked up. On Alexandar Wang's cold, pale neck, 2 kiss marks stood out clearly. His lips, usually colorless, were stained a dark red, no doubt from where I'd bitten him last night. It was far too intimate. Even the stiff, old-fashioned Grand Tutor Pai looked stricken. "General, you've only just returned to the capital. You're not yet married, yet you behave so recklessly. Where is your decorum?" Alexandar Wang gave a scornful laugh and looked straight at me. I read the threat in his eyes. I sprang to my feet and forced myself to smooth things over. It's fine, it's fine. The northern frontier has always had more open customs. The general has been there so long, it's normal for him to pick up a more carefree, romantic style. Alexandar Wang's expression hardened at once. He looked at me, anger contained in his voice, slow and deliberate. Carefree. Romantic? It was a badly chosen line. Yes, we were both drunk last night, and Alexandar Wang was the one who held me first. But the one who stripped the other's clothes first and touched warm skin inch by inch was me. As I scrambled for a way to change the subject, Alexandar Wang suddenly curled his lips into a smile. The Emperor is right. I was romantic, and I did acquire a taste for it, but since the Emperor doesn't like it, I won't do it again. Grand Tutor Pei couldn't take any more. He cut in sharply. Emperor, since the general has urgent matters to report, I'll take my leave. After he left, the room fell into a brief, heavy silence. Then Alexandar Wang began his report in a low voice, detailing the northern frontier wars of the past 3 years. In truth, I wasn't unaware. Though he never returned, his memorials arrived on time every month. I knew he had led troops to repel Liao Kingdom's iron hooves again and again when they crossed into Great Zhao's borders. He had even taken 3 of their cities in succession. So much so that Liao Kingdom had to send envoys to sue for peace, even attempting to offer a princess for a political marriage. Of course, I refused. My reason was that Empress Stella and I were deeply devoted. Peace talks were fine, but a marriage alliance was unnecessary. I summoned David Li again and had him draft an edict. Alexandar Wang was promoted to first-rank general, who pacifies the north and granted a first-class noble title. It was a risky move. When father was still alive, he told my brother that although the Wang family had served loyally for 3 generations, one must still be wary of those who held military power. But I had been driven to the edge. The court was turbulent, and border wars flared again and again. Aside from Alexandar Wang, I had no one left to use. And, for reasons I couldn't name, I trusted him. Alexandar Wang accepted the edict and rose. After David Li left, he stepped forward and locked his eyes on mine. You know very well. What I want isn't this. Then what was it? My mind flashed back to 3 years ago. After the massacre in the capital outskirts, Alexandar Wang believed I was dead. On the day the coffin was buried, he left the capital that very night and rode north. 7 days later, news came from the border. At Rock Pass, he intercepted that band of mountain bandits. He took the leader's head with his sword, killed more than a dozen others, then rode away drenched in blood. Later, he thundered back into the capital. He threw the leader's head before me and told me, expressionless, that he would go guard the northern frontier. I agreed. A dull ache spread through my chest. I stood first. I'll see the general out. Alexandar Wang didn't argue. He simply followed, half a step behind me. We left the imperial study and walked down a long corridor. Sunlight slipped in under the eaves at the corner and fell across Alexandar Wang's side. The light was warm, cutting cleanly against his sharp, chilling aura. That edge had been tempered in the northern frontier's wind and snow. The lavish capital could never raise a man like him. At the steps outside the hall, I was about to offer a formal farewell when my gaze swept up, and I saw Nolan Ning climbing toward us. He saluted and said quietly, "I wish to request an imperial physician to come to my residence." Nolan looked pale, shadows under his eyes, as though he hadn't slept. I asked with concern, "Why do you need a physician? Are you ill?" At my side, Alexandar Wang let out a contemptuous snort. My face burned. I was about to turn and reprimand him when Nolan's voice reached me. After last night's banquet, my wife felt unwell. We called a doctor to take her pulse and learned she is 2 months pregnant. But the pregnancy is unstable. I can't rest easy, so I'd like to invite an imperial physician to help her keep the pregnancy. It was as if an arrow punched straight through my heart. Pain surged, my ears rang. Nolan's face blurred before me. My fingers curled into a tight fist inside my sleeve. I could almost taste blood at the back of my throat. "All right, David Li, take Minister Ning to the Imperial Medical Bureau. Have Physician Fu follow him to Prince Huayan's manor and take a look." I heard my own voice, steady, even. Nolan thanked me politely and left with David Li. Only Alexandar Wang and I remained. "Nolan has already left," he said. "You can let go now, Emperor." I lowered my head and realized I was gripping his sleeve. The fine, deep teal fabric had been crushed into a wrinkled knot over the elegant bone of his wrist. I had thought that after last night, Alexandar Wang would surely despise me. In a moment like this, he would probably add a few cutting remarks. But his voice was steady, the sharpness restrained. It even held a rare hint of gentleness. I came back to myself, released his sleeve, and said softly, "General, walk with me." 3 Alexandar Wang accompanied me through most of the imperial garden. When the sky darkened, I was tired, so I sat in a pavilion near my residence. I had servants bring 2 jars of wine. I meant to drown my sorrow again tonight. After a few cups, I propped my chin in the wavering moonlight and looked at the man across from me. Alexandar Wang, his eyes, clear as glazed glass, stayed fixed on me. Complex emotions broke through the cold surface. I heard him tell the servants outside the pavilion, "The emperor is drunk and needs rest. All of you, leave." Night fell like a veil. Soon it was only him and me. The drunkenness surged. My vision blurred. I slumped over the table and murmured, "Alexandar Wang, I don't like being the emperor. I don't like wearing heavy robes in every kind of weather. I don't like watching the person I love marry someone else. But I have no choice." As I spoke, my voice caught. "Father and mother are gone. My brother lost an arm protecting me. He's their son, and I'm their daughter. I'm Great Zhao's princess. If I don't do this, what else can I do?" Back then, in Vivian Zhou's morning hall, Alexandar Wang had asked with reddened eyes, "That was your own sister. Doesn't it hurt?" How could it not hurt? How could it not? Father was not a good emperor. He wasn't skilled in governance, nor did he know the art of balance. He dismissed the harem and devoted himself to mother alone, stirring deep resentment in the court. But my brother was a good crown prince. He began studying at 3, worked tirelessly, and if Great Zhou had been placed in his hands, it could have flourished for another 100 years. But they all died in front of me. Father and mother lay in a pool of blood, eyes wide open, staring at us. My brother's heart had been pierced through, yet he still struggled to lift his arm and block a fatal sword for me. In that flowing crimson, I grew up in an instant. And I understood clearly that I could no longer marry Nolan. Not only because, when the tragedy happened 3 years ago, I was stabbed 3 times, one blade piercing my lower abdomen. Later, Stella secretly hired a doctor to examine me. He told me, "Miss, the injury has damaged your foundation. I'm afraid you won't be able to bear children." But also because I was now the emperor. On my shoulders lay the hatred of a nearly exterminated family and Great Zhou's uncertain fate. Yet before I turned 17, I was only a simple, spoiled girl. My greatest wish was to marry Nolan, grow old with the one I loved, and spend a lifetime together. Green silk skirts, gold-threaded clothes, hairpins and dangling ornaments, the things I once loved, the things I'd taken for granted, would never again be worn openly in this life. Warm fingertips brushed the corner of my eye. Through blurred lashes, Alexandar Wang's face seemed suddenly closer. Only then did I realize I'd been crying. "But Vivi, you've been a very good emperor." It had to be my imagination. Alexandar Wang couldn't possibly speak to me so gently. Yet as he drew me up, my restless hearted at his affirmation. For 3 years, I'd lived on a knife's edge. I didn't dare take a single wrong step. I couldn't tell Stella these things. I didn't know who else I could tell. Yet today, I spilled it all to Alexandar Wang. In truth, from very early on, I had trusted him for no reason, and feared him a little too, though I was 2 months older than him. Nolan always smiled at me gently, but when Alexandar Wang came to see my brother, he always wore a stern face. Whenever he saw me tilt my face up to speak to Nolan, his expression would turn even colder. At 16, on the night before my coming-of-age ceremony, I stayed up too late reading storybooks and couldn't wake the next morning. So I begged my brother, "Wear my dress and go in my place, will you?" We were twins. Since childhood, we were similar in build and looks. The small differences could be covered with makeup. Unable to resist my coaxing, my brother agreed. I pulled the quilt over my head and went back to sleep. He returned later, shook me awake, and handed me an exquisitely made palace lantern tassel gold hairpin. He told me it was Alexandar Wang's coming-of-age gift. I tensed at once. "He didn't recognize you, did he?" My brother hesitated, then shook his head. "He came in a hurry. After he delivered it and said 2 sentences, he went back to the iron camp. The hairpin was delicate, set with rubies, exactly the kind of lavish style I adored back then. I toyed with the tassels, turning it over and over, so absorbed I missed the complicated look on my brother's face. I was still drifting in the past when my body suddenly felt weightless. Alexandar Wang picked me up. His robe hem fell and trailed, winding through his fingers, drawing all the way into my softly lit bedchamber. He set me on the couch, pressed his forehead to mine, and stared at me from inches away. The sharpness he hid in daylight bared itself fully now. He looked aggressively intent. Alexandar Wang stared at me, voice low and heavy. "You said you watched the person you love marry someone else. Who do you love?" "Nolan Ning?" At the mention of Nolan, the pain in my chest rose again. Yet under Alexandar Wang's wounded gaze, that pain dissolved in a strange way. In its place came a confusion I didn't dare examine. I couldn't bring myself to nod, and I couldn't bring myself to deny it. I stayed silent. He gave a soft, humorless laugh, then suddenly caught my wrist and guided my hand into his collar. "Then what you did to me last night?" A faint, cool scent rose from him, like moonlight shattered into lake water. I admit, at first I meant to pull my hand away, to prove my innocence. But Alexandar Wang had trained in martial arts since childhood. Sleek muscle lay beneath smooth, cool, pale skin. The feel of him was far too good. And if I thought about it, I'd enjoyed last night too. So I hesitated only a moment. Then, using the position he'd given me, I slid deeper, brazen and righteous. "I'm seducing you." The skin beneath my palm grew hotter. Alexandar Wang leaned in and kissed me. In the eyes that had once been deep and cold, sparks began to burn. His voice, thick with restrained desire, brushed my ear. "You clearly love Prince Huyan's heir, yet you insist on seducing me. What does that mean?" In the end, I didn't answer. I only looped my arms around his neck and kissed him, as if deliberately dodging the question. When I woke the next day, Alexandar Wang was still there. This time, at least, he didn't press a sword to my throat. He simply dressed, stood by the bed, and looked down at me. His voice was cold. "About last night, I'll still treat it as the emperor being drunk. Morning court is soon. I'm leaving the palace." He left without looking back. I sat up with the quilt clutched in my arms. The room still held traces of intimacy that hadn't yet faded. One question kept circling my mind. Yesterday morning he'd threatened me with his life to make me take responsibility. This morning he acted as if it didn't matter at all. What was Alexandar Wang thinking? I couldn't figure it out. But it didn't matter. From his attitude last night, I was certain. Even knowing my true identity, he still stood on my side. He was trustworthy, someone I could use. That was enough. 3 years ago that risky move had been the right one. The civil and military officials stood in ranks on both sides. At the head on the left stood Lucas Liu, the chancellor I had newly appointed last year. On the right stood Alexandar Wang, expressionless. After handling state matters just before I dismissed court, I spoke. 3 years ago, the late emperor, the late empress, and Princess Changle died at the hands of criminals in the capital outskirts. I have ordered an investigation ever since. Only recently have we gained a few leads. Alexandar Wang suddenly lifted his head to look at me. I met his gaze and continued. "General, from today onward, I order you to take command of the capital's imperial guards and pursue this matter with all your strength. Do you have any objections?" In truth, I'd had some clues since the start of the year. But then, the situation in the capital wasn't stable. I didn't dare move rashly. Now Alexandar Wang had returned, along with the 80,000 northern frontier troops under his command. I finally had enough leverage. Alexandar Wang knelt to receive the order. I ignored the subtle expressions on certain officials' faces and dismissed court. After leaving Shaoyang Hall, I went to Phoenix Palace to see Stella. When I was still in the inner chambers, Stella and I were friends. Later, she was the one who saved me. To repay that debt, I issued an edict and brought her into the palace, making her empress. I saved her from being married off by the Marquise of Valor to some worthless playboy. That night, as the wedding candles burned, she leaned on my knees and said seriously, "Thank you, Vivi. If you hadn't helped me, I really would have had to marry. It's mutual benefit. It also ties your father to my ship and gives me the backbone to restrain those people." These 3 years, Stella and I supported each other. We guarded this enormous secret with strict care, narrowly avoiding danger again and again. Back then, those officials and maternal clans who stirred at father's death were suppressed, scattered, or sent away. Now they could only hide in the shadows, not daring to move lightly. I ate 2 pieces of pastry, dismissed the servants, and told Stella I had ordered Alexandar Wang to investigate what happened 3 years ago. Stella raised an eyebrow. "Do you trust him?" I nodded. After a moment's hesitation, I still told her, "That night at the banquet, I was drunk. I meant to test him, but I lost control. 1 night of pleasure? 2 nights." Stella choked on her tea. It took her a long time to recover. Those alluring, cat-like eyes of hers slid toward me. When her gaze settled on my face, it paused slightly. "Forget it. Alexandar Wang is trustworthy enough. If you like him, enjoying it isn't a bad thing." I knew why she said that. She knew too, but we left it there. Neither of us went any deeper. 3 days later, I summoned Alexandar Wang to the palace again. As always, he wore black. His dark hair was tied with a simple silver-white ribbon. A few loose strands fell across his forehead. The scattered light made his already severe features look even more shadowed. He didn't need to do anything. He only had to stand there and sweep that sharp gaze over me, and it felt like the northern frontier's cold wind, wrapped in moonlight, had blown into the treacherous capital. But Alexandar Wang was clearly still angry with me, because the entire conversation went like this. I asked 1 question, he answered 1. He refused to offer a single word more. Even when I put on the proper smile of a wise ruler, he faced me with a blank expression, his eyes never wavering. I told David Lee, "Leave for now. Have them prepare dinner. The general and I have other matters to discuss." After David Lee left, I immediately let the smile drop. I walked up to Alexandar Wang, tilted my chin slightly, and let my fingertips brush his wrist as if by accident. Once, twice, until his eyes darkened. Finally, unable to endure it, he seized my hand and bit out, "Vivian Zhou, what exactly do you want?" I hooked my free arm around his neck, pressed my lips to his, and murmured, "Of course. I'm taking responsibility for you." I was gambling that Alexandar Wang wouldn't have the heart to shove me away. Because those 2 nights, even if we'd clung to each other in drunken indulgence, neither of us had been so drunk as to lose all awareness. Sure enough, he stiffened for only an instant, then kissed me back. Harder. Our tangled steps were like a dance. We stumbled back several paces and fell onto the soft couch draped with layered curtains. It was a long, wet kiss. My fear, my anticipation, my reckless all-or-nothing resolve, and countless subtle emotions I couldn't put into words, all of it vanished for a brief moment inside that kiss. The orange-red light of sunset seeped through the translucent window paper. In that glow, I watched his eyes and whispered against his lips, "Alexandar Wang, stay for dinner. I had the imperial kitchen make the pastries you like." That night, Alexandar Wang naturally stayed in my bedchamber again. By the glow of red candles, I bent and kissed a sheen of moisture onto his lips, watching the light in his eyes sink darker by degrees. Early each morning before dawn, Alexandar Wang would leave the palace again, ensuring no one discovered our relationship. The secrecy, like stolen pleasure, only made it more thrilling. Perhaps Alexandar Wang hadn't wanted it this way at first. But under my deliberate teasing, keeping him after court, letting my fingers catch at his sash, again and again he surrendered to raw desire. Only, as the days blurred into indulgence, a thin, secret hope began to grow in my heart. After morning court one day, for once I didn't keep Alexandar Wang behind. After court dispersed, I secretly summoned a doctor. I had him blindfolded and examined my pulse through a screen. After a long while, he chose his words carefully. "Miss, your old injuries never healed, and you've developed a heart ailment. If you don't proper care, I fear." "I fear what?" "Your time is short." I fell silent. After a moment, I said flatly, "And as for bearing children? 3 years ago, your foundation was already ruined. There is truly no remedy." I waved my hand and had him taken away. The palace sank into dead silence. After a long while, a soft warmth covered the back of my hand. I looked down to find Stella's long fingers, nails painted red, stroking gently, again and again. "Vivi." "I know." I exhaled slowly, dragging myself out of that brief, bewildered ache and back into my usual calm. "It's fine. Didn't we already know this would be the result 3 years ago?" Stella's brows knitted, displeased. "But you and Alexandar Wang." It's only a brief indulgence. I was sure my expression looked calm, flat, flawless. Stella, I know exactly what I want. Ever since you saved me from that place 3 years ago, there's been only one thing on my mind. Find the real culprit. Then take revenge. Later, perhaps, I would add, restoring Great Joe's legacy for generations. But in all of that, there likely wouldn't be room for Alexandar Wang. First, he was Great Joe's loyal general. Then he was the son of the Wang family. Only last was he the childhood companion who had carved out a small patch of clean ground in my heart. Stella sighed. Her voice gentled into reassurance. Vivi, a person's fate isn't always set in stone. Alexandar Wang doesn't feel nothing for you. He left the capital 3 years ago and never married. Maybe after you get your revenge, there will be another way. Maybe, I smiled, still clear-headed, still unmoved by Stella's hopeful wish. But it didn't matter. Even if it was only a fleeting blossom of joy, I was satisfied. Over the next few days, Alexandar Wang sent word into the palace. The matter I'd ordered him to investigate had finally turned up a lead. He needed to leave the capital to pursue it. So for the next few days it would be inconvenient for him to enter the palace and admire the flowers with me. A sudden memory surfaced. One candle-lit, lingering night when desire ran high. He'd snapped a camellia from the table and set it on my flat lower belly, studying it with care. In his gaze, fine strands of obsession wove together, inch by inch, into a gorgeous brocade. I'd asked, "What are you looking at?" He'd curved his lips and leaned down to kiss me. Admiring the flowers. The memory stole my focus for a moment. When I came back to myself, my cheeks were warm. Luckily, the servants were standing below with their heads lowered. They hadn't seen. I forced myself to stay calm. I understand. Go back to the Wang household's man and tell him this. I'll be waiting in the palace for General Wang's news at any time. And remember, repeat it word for word. Yes. About 5 days later, after Alexandar Wang returned to the capital, he entered the palace at once. I'd meant to mock him for that admiring the flowers line, but the thought vanished the moment I saw his cold, severe expression. The black robe he usually wore was smeared with dust and blood. His lips were pressed tight. His eyes swept over me, flat, faintly mocking for no clear reason. I frowned, dismissed everyone, and only when the room held just the two of us did I ask in a low voice, "Weren't you investigating that matter? Any progress?" "Yes." He lowered his eyes. After a moment, he looked up again. "But are you willing to believe it? Or rather, Vivian Joe, are you willing to believe it?" I caught the deeper meaning in his words. I froze, then stepped down from the table, gripped his chin, and pressed a wet kiss to his lips. "Can you say it now?" "One of the bandits from that incident 3 years ago. The one called James. He showed up near the capital outskirts. I didn't want to alert them, so I followed alone, in secret. I found him hiding with several other bandits in a ruined mountain temple. I was discovered by accident. I killed the others and left only James alive, wounded. I let him go on purpose and followed him in secret, until he disappeared into the back alley of Prince Huayan's manor. When the last words fell, he stepped back slightly. He stood in the shadow the sunlight didn't reach and looked at me. In that instant, countless emotions surged through his eyes. In the end, they all sank into silence, as if he'd finally bowed to fate's verdict. I was quiet for a moment. Then I looked at him and said coldly, "Does General Wang think I'll let what happened 3 years ago go just because I can't forget my old feelings for Prince Huayan's heir?" I couldn't deny it. For one brief moment, panic did rise in my chest, but it was quickly smothered by blood-dark hatred. And then I saw it in Alexandar Wang's eyes. There was even a trace of grievance, raw and scattered. So all this time, was that how he saw me? Once, I truly loved Nolan Ning. I liked him so much I would have married him at any cost. But if Prince Huayan's manor was truly involved in that matter, then no matter how deep those old feelings ran, they wouldn't soften me. Alexandar Wang and I parted on bad terms. After he left, I couldn't stop thinking about the blood on him. I pictured him fighting bandits that vicious, and I couldn't help worrying. In the end, I still sent someone to the Imperial Medical Bureau for ointment and ordered it delivered to the general's residence. After that, I issued an order. Nolan Ning, Prince Huayan's heir, was to meet me in 3 days on a painted pleasure boat at Moonlit Lake in the capital. Nolan Ning arrived on time. I dressed properly, pushed open the boat's door, stepped inside, dismissed all the servants from the boat, and then said to Nolan Ning, "Today we won't speak of ruler and subject, only of old feelings." "Emperor," I lifted a hand. "Nolan Ning, do you remember what day it is today?" He looked at me, puzzled. I smiled slightly. 5 years ago, on this day, Father bestowed a marriage upon you and Vivi." Nolan Ning's eyes went distant for a moment. I drained the cup in front of me in one swallow. "To be honest, at first I didn't approve of your marriage to Vivi. But she liked you so much, and Father and I indulged her. If she hadn't died 3 years ago, you two would have been married for 3 years by now, wouldn't you?" The pain that surged into his eyes didn't look fake. But I caught it sharply. Beneath that pain, something deeper lay in wait. So I drank 2 more cups, pretended to be tipsy, and reached out to pat the arm he'd rested on the table. "I often think about it," I said. "That massacre at the capital outskirts 3 years ago. Why was I the one who lived in the end? I was the crown prince. Vivi was just a princess who didn't understand anything. Even if those people meant rebellion, they should have come for me. What would it have cost them to let Vivi live?" In truth, after Stella saved me back then, I clung to my last shred of awareness and told her to send trusted servants to deal with fathers, mothers, and my brother's bodies. I left no evidence for those who came later. Later still, when my wounds had healed a little, Stella and I built this enormous lie together. Nolan Ning's expression turned impossibly complicated. Perhaps the drink pushed him over the edge. He almost blurted out, "Back then I clearly..." "Clearly what? Back then you clearly what?" As if realizing he'd misspoken, he clamped his mouth shut. After a moment of silence, he put on a heartbroken look. "Emperor, you're drunk. I don't want to bring up Vivi's death again. I only hope she can live happily and safely in her next life, and never meet evil people again." The sadness in his eyes was so fake, I immediately saw the panic churning underneath, ready to break through. Nolan Ning glanced at the sky outside the window, darkening by degrees. Then he turned back and cupped his hands to me. "Emperor, it's getting late. My wife is pregnant and needs me to look after her. I'll take my leave for today." I lowered my head and tugged at the corner of my mouth. When I looked up again, my face was flawless. "Go. I'll stay here alone with Vivi for a while." Nolan Ning bowed and said goodbye, but when he reached the door, he stopped and looked back at me. Noticing he hadn't moved for a long time, I raised my eyes. I met his gaze head-on, catching the lingering shock in his eyes not yet fully gone. "What is it?" "Nothing. I overstepped." Nolan Ning shook his head and bowed again. "Emperor, I'll withdraw first." After he left, the wind slowly grew stronger, rocking the painted boat gently. In that sway, like ripples across the water, I lay with my cheek against the table and drank cup after cup. The urgent rain tapping the window made it impossible not to think of the past. Moonlit Lake was where I often sneaked out to play when I was still a princess of Great Joe. Back then, Nolan Ning was always by my side, and my brother always brought Alexandar Wang along too. But my whole heart and eyes were on Nolan Ning. I rarely noticed the quiet Alexandar Wang behind my brother. And because I thought he didn't like me, somewhere in my mind I was a little afraid of him. Once, I heard that a twin-stem lotus had bloomed at the center of the lotus pond in the middle of the lake. I was curious and wanted to see it, but that day the wind was fierce and the rain came hard. The boat couldn't go out into the lake, and I'd heard twin-stem lotuses were delicate. After a storm like that, there might be nothing left at all. In the end, I went back gloomy and disappointed. But after returning to the palace, I received a brocade box my brother had sent. When I opened it, inside was a twin-stem lotus, still beaded with water. I was overjoyed. I immediately had the maids summon craftsmen and ordered them to make me a full set of hair ornaments and jewelry modeled after that lotus. After everyone left, I sat alone under the candlelight and toyed with it, unwilling to let it go, until the flower wilted in my hands. Early the next morning, I had the servants make delicious pastries and carried them over to thank my brother. He finished the whole plate of red bean cakes before telling me the flower had been picked for me by Alexandar Wang. I froze. My brother smiled, a little teasing. "Well, want to make another plate of pastries to thank Alexandar Wang? He doesn't even like sweets," I muttered under my breath. When I turned around, I saw Alexandar Wang standing in the doorway against the light, looking at me with a cold, indifferent face. Princess. Emperor. A sudden voice yanked me back to the present. I thought I was hearing things, until the figure at the door of the painted boat came closer. A warm grip closed around my wrist. Only then did I realize Alexandar Wang was truly standing in front of me. He said coldly, "Prince Huayan's heir is gone?" The emperor didn't simply keep him from for the night to reminisce. I stared, then flung his hand off hard and snapped, "What are you saying? Alexandar Wang, watch your mouth!" "I'm being improper, then punish me," he said. "Either way, I'm nothing like Prince Huayan's heir." After he spoke, his lips stayed pressed tight. The lines of his face looked especially hard. Yet in those eyes, dense with storm and wind, that same hint of grievance still surfaced, scattered like sparks. It stabbed into the softest place in my heart, cold and sharp. He couldn't hold it back any longer. Face taut, he demanded, "Since you and I have already been like that, why were you being so intimate with Nolan Ning?" So while Nolan Ning and I talked inside the painted boat, he'd been watching outside. He'd seen me pat Nolan Ning's arm. The wind and rain grew more urgent, and the whole boat began to sway. In that water-like rocking, panic tangled with the chaos in my chest. I forced myself to look at him with an icy expression. "Alexandar Wang, I'm the emperor. As a subject, you have no right to question my private affairs." That seemed to enrage him. He stepped forward, seized my chin, and crushed a vicious kiss onto my mouth. The heat of wine surged up, and the boat rocked even harder. I should have drowned in that burning tide of feeling. But in that instant, the old pulse diagnosis and the old doctor's words rose in my mind again. I wouldn't live long, and with Alexandar Wang, there was even less of a future. He should finish this last task for me. After I died, he should marry well and have children, and carry on the Wang family line as loyal ministers and fine generals. I closed my eyes, clung to his arm, and pretended to be drunk. I murmured, "Nolan Ning." Alexandar Wang went rigid. He shoved me away and staggered back 2 steps. He stood on the other side of the table and stared at me, rubbing hard at the corner of his mouth with his thumb. I could almost see hatred in the clarity of his eyes. A long time passed. He stared at me and spoke, word by word, his voice hoarse. "Vivian Zhou, I'd truly rather you had died 3 years ago. In truth, I never liked being emperor. My brother and I looked somewhat alike, 7 or 8 parts the same, but our builds were nothing alike. Every morning after I got up, I had to pad my shoulders and shoes. I had to wrap thick white cloth around my slim waist before I could put on the dragon robe. I also had to sharpen my facial contours with makeup and stick on a false Adam's apple before I dared step out. When I did all this, it was either just me or me and Stella. I've killed many people too. Some were corrupt officials, some were parasites feeding off the state. Some simply knew my secret. Back then, when my brother studied statecraft under the tutor, I listened along as well. I understood what they meant by, "A general's glory is built on a mountain of bones." But it was hard for me to do, and yet the flood of fate forced me onto that seat all the same. When I opened my eyes, I was already lying in bed in Phoenix Palace. Stella's faint, calm fragrance drifted into my nose, easing the headache brought on by drink and a chill. Seeing me awake, she rose, brought back a bowl of medicine, and held it out. "Drink." The bitter warmth slid down my throat. Slowly, I remembered what had happened yesterday. It had been pouring. Alexandar Wang left after throwing those cruel words at me. I stood in the doorway and watched him swing up onto his horse. He spurred it hard and vanished into the curtain of rain. Only then did I walk out slowly, climb into the carriage, and say, "Back to the palace." I really had been a bit drunk. After I returned, I went straight to Stella's place. She had the servants prepare hot water, then made me drink a bowl of hot soup. Only then did she let me sleep beside her. But because I'd been soaked through by the rain, and because my body was never very strong, I caught a cold. I didn't recover until I'd taken medicine for several days. These days at court, Alexandar Wang stood below, staring at me with a stern, cold face. Only when I coughed softly did his expression shift, just slightly. But no matter how I ordered him, openly or indirectly, to enter the palace, Alexandar Wang avoided me. His excuse was the same. He was investigating the truth of what happened 3 years ago. I told Stella, I think Alexandar Wang is really angry with me. She was embroidering a sachet. At that, she glanced at me as if she found it rare. What did you say to him? Even Alexandar Wang can get angry at you? After hesitating again and again, I still told her what had happened on the painted boat that day. Stella's expression turned subtle, her eyes full of tangled feelings. After a long silence, she let out a soft sigh and came over to hold me. Vivi, I know what you're thinking, but it isn't fair to Alexandar Wang. You've already drawn him in. You've felt his feelings, and you still want him to marry and have children later. How could he possibly do that? I was quiet for a moment. But I can't marry into the Wang family, and I can't bear his children. Then have you asked Alexandar Wang? Maybe to him, it doesn't matter at all. I buried my face in her shoulder, breathing in that faint, cool scent. But Alexandar Wang won't even acknowledge me now? Should I find a way to make it up to him? Yes. So the next day, I had someone issue an edict in the name of the approaching year's end. A palace banquet would be held in 10 days, with fireworks arranged as part of the evening. Alexandar Wang should understand what I meant. When I was 14, at the Flower Festival Lantern Fair, I slipped out of the palace to find Nolan Ning. But in the crowded streets, I nearly got separated, nearly trampled. In my panic, a hand suddenly grabbed mine and pulled me through the press of bodies, all the way to a safe bridge. When I turned my head, I realized it was Alexandar Wang. His expression was as cold and indifferent as ever, but the dense lantern light behind me reflected in his eyes, melting the harshness into a soft, warm haze. I'd been a little afraid of him, yet when I saw his gaze, that fear strangely began to fade. I asked him softly, "How are you here? Where's my brother?" Alexandar Wang lifted a hand and tucked the sweat-damp hair at my temple behind my ear. He didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Why did the princess sneak out of the palace alone?" I didn't know why, but I instinctively felt Alexandar Wang didn't like Nolan Ning very much, and I hadn't found him anyway. So I didn't say I'd come out to look for Nolan Ning. I only said, I heard there would be fireworks outside the palace today. I wanted to see them. Alexandar Wang looked pleased at once. He said, "Then watch from here." That bridge wasn't the best spot. Some scattered sparks were blocked by the shadows of trees along the bank, and you couldn't see the full display. But the noisy crowd all around, and the warm threads of fireworks smoke in the air, still etched themselves into my heart. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. On the day of the palace banquet, I sat high in the main seat. Stella was beside me, looking unusually uneasy. Following her gaze downward, I realized she kept looking at the chancellor, Lucas Liu, who sat directly opposite Alexandar Wang. He was the top scholar from 2 years ago. I had cultivated him myself, one of the few key officials who stood wholly on my side. Could it be? Something was going on between him and Stella? Because of Stella, I glanced at Lucas Liu a few more times. But when I looked back at Alexandar Wang, I found the warmth that had just returned to his eyes had turned ice-cold once more. When he noticed me watching, he even tugged at his lips in faint mockery. Did he misunderstand and think I was interested in Lucas Liu? A bad feeling rose in me at once. But this wasn't a setting where I could explain. To ease the atmosphere, I had David Lee summon the arranged music and dancers. After the performance came the fireworks. Little palace maids dressed in finery danced lightly to the sound of kolmu and flutes. I propped my chin, watching with casual disinterest while my thoughts kept circling around what Alexandar Wang was thinking. Then it happened in an instant. No one saw clearly how the maid at the very front sprang up onto the main seat. By the time I came back to myself, she was already in front of me, tearing off the false Adam's apple at my throat. Bottomless terror flooded upward like water weeds. I instinctively leaned back, but she had already seized my collar and yanked down hard, exposing a corner of the thick binding cloth across my chest. Stella threw herself in front of me and cried out, fast and loud, "Assassin! Protect the Emperor! Protect the Emperor!" Before her words could fall, someone in the hall suddenly stood. "Protect the Emperor? Empress, look more closely. The one standing beside you now, is it truly the Emperor or the former Princess Vivian Zhao?" That voice was painfully familiar. The instant it sounded, it stirred countless scattered fragments of the past. Afternoons when I carried pastries to the imperial study, summers filled with cicadas, the girlish flutter that once haunted my heart. In this moment, it all burned to ash. I never imagined the one who would step forward and expose my true identity would be Nolan Ning. Or rather, when had he discovered it? As the question rose, I suddenly remembered that day on the painted boat. Just before he left, that flash of shock in his eyes. "Vivian Zhou, you're a woman. How can you ascend the throne? How can you take your brother's identity and spin such an outrageous lie?" As if in answer, that fearless little maid shoved Stella aside and lunged for me again. She clawed at my clothes, trying to strip me even further. A figure flashed in front of me. A sharp silver gleam flared. A long sword drove deep into the maid's heart, then was wrenched free. She didn't even have time to make a sound before she collapsed in a spray of blood. A cold, bracing, faint scent slid into my breath, as if the high moon over the northern frontier had melted into the wind inside the hall. I'd smelled that scent on countless nights of tangled desire between sheets, and I had willingly drowned in it. It was Alexandar Wang. He casually tossed the blood-dripping sword to the ground. Unfastening his cloak, he pulled it over my head, then swept me up in his arms and turned to leave. His voice carried a tremor so slight it was almost imperceptible. "Don't be afraid, Vivian Zhou. I'll get you out of here." That single sentence seemed to hold endless strength. It seeped into my icy fingertips, rode the current of my blood to my heart, then gathered from countless tiny corners of me into a force I could stand on. I suddenly went still. "No." "Alexandar Wang, put me down." My voice was steady, final. Alexandar Wang paused. His cold gaze swept over my face. In his eyes, I saw my own reflection. My face was pale, but my eyes were unwavering. Just like 3 years ago, that afternoon when Stella pulled me out of a pool of blood. Slowly, he loosened his hold and set me on my feet. I steadied myself and took a step forward. Then I tore off the cloak he'd wrapped around me and drew a deep breath. "That's right. I'm a woman. I was once a princess, but now I'm also the Emperor of Great Zhou." In the silence, the civil and military officials all turned to look at me. I lifted my chin. "I want to ask the heir of Prince Huaiyan, so what if I'm a woman? Why can't a woman be emperor? Why can't a woman hold office? Why can't a woman do something for the common people? Are women born inferior?" Nolan Ning's expression flickered. He avoided my gaze. 3 years ago, when I ascended the throne, the treasury was empty. The canal wasn't finished. Officials around Bianzhou were in each other's pockets, and the people were full of grievances. The northern frontier was in turmoil, and pirates often appeared along the eastern coast. Now the treasury is full, taxes have been reduced, the canal is complete. The atmosphere in Bianzhou has changed for the better. The unrest in the northern frontier has been calmed. The pirates on the coast, those who could be persuaded were, and those who couldn't, were killed. Even if the one who inherited the throne back then had been my imperial brother, he might not have done better than I did. And yet the achievements of 3 years on the throne, can they all be erased just because I'm a woman? On the last sentence, my voice rose sharp and ringing. The question cut through the hall, hard and clear. A cold night wind rushed in through the palace doors, snapping our robes. Amid the uproar, Alexandar Wang behind me was the first to step forward. He descended the steps one by one, then turned and knelt before me. His voice was bright, like a clear breeze, and moonlight spread across the night sky. "Long live the Emperor." The second to kneel was Lucas Liu. In 3 years of rule, the Emperor has appointed the worthy, quelled war, and devoted everything to the realm and the people. Such merit should never be erased because of a woman's identity. I am still willing to honor the Emperor as my sovereign. After they knelt, the officials behind them followed, one after another, dropping to their knees and hailing me as a wise ruler. At last, I looked at Nolan Ning, whose expression kept shifting, and at Prince Huaiyan beside him. The corner of my mouth tugged up. "Prince Huaiyan, do you still refuse to accept this?" He fell silent for a moment. In the end, he understood the tide had turned against him. Gritting his teeth, he knelt. "I have no objections." My gaze swept over everyone in the hall, until it finally settled on Alexandar Wang at the front. He knelt before me, looking up. His eyes were submissive now, not a man looking at the woman he loved, but a subject looking at the sovereign he revered. Rise, my ministers, I smiled. It's late. I've also had people arrange a fireworks show. Let's go watch it together. But I knew perfectly well that although the little palace maid was dead, her background was anything but simple. Some people at this moment probably had no appetite left for fireworks. After that, everything unfolded as if by its own momentum. Stella and I traced the little palace maid's origins all the way back. In the end, we found her first entry into the palace was entangled with Grand Tutor Pei in countless ways. And Grand Tutor Pei had always been close with Prince Huayan's manor. Just then, Alexandar Wang suddenly entered the palace to request an audience. In the imperial study, he handed me a letter, its pages yellowed with age. Only then did he speak, his voice low. I kept investigating and found that the matter of Prince Huayan being granted the title of a non-imperial prince by Emperor Taizong seems to have another story behind it. Following scattered clues, I found someone trustworthy. From him, I learned that Prince Huayan and the late emperor were half-brothers, born of the same father. But because his mother consort was guilty, he was left among commoners. Later, Emperor Taizong found him and brought him back. Out of regard for the bond between father and son, Emperor Taizong used a pretext to grant him a title as a non-imperial prince. After the late emperor took the throne, Prince Huayan grew dissatisfied. He refused to remain a subject and plotted in secret for years. On one hand, he had his son draw close to the imperial bloodline to gather information and track movements. On the other, he colluded with people from the Liao kingdom in the northern frontier, having them disguise themselves as bandits, and with Grand Tutor Pei's help, carried out the ambush. It should have been foolproof. They just didn't expect you to escape. Once again, I thought of the half-sentence Nolan Ning had blurted out that day on the painted pleasure boat. Was my survival and escape really just luck? Or had Nolan Ning arranged long ago for me to live? Never imagining I'd be bold enough to impersonate my brother, and that under Stella's cover, no one would suspect a thing? In the end, memory settled like dust into the sea. I rose and said solemnly, "Mobilize the troops. Go to Prince Huayan's manor." That day in the capital, ordinary people shut their doors tight as 3,000 imperial guards flooded through streets and alleys. Grand Tutor Pei's residence and Prince Huayan's manor were both raided and confiscated. But I hadn't expected that even with such manpower, Prince Huayan would still slip out of the capital with 2 trusted aides. I sat on horseback, looking down as Nolan Ning was dragged out by the imperial guards and fitted with a wooden kangi. As if sensing my gaze, he lifted his head and looked straight at me. Those eyes that had once been gentle, the eyes that had enchanted me, were now filled with hate. "Vivian Zhou," he said my name in a voice that was strange and icy. "I hate you. I thought you were dead. I really thought you were dead." I met his stare without flinching and gave the order, cold and crisp. "Take him away. Throw him into the imperial prison." On the way back, the imperial guards rode ahead. I stayed behind on horseback with Alexandar Wang. At first, we said nothing. Then he spoke. "I'll order people to leave the capital and keep pursuing Prince Huayan. I won't let him escape Great Zhou's borders." "All right." He turned his head slightly and glanced at me. "Vivian Zhou. You look good in a skirt too." For today's operation, I wore a deep, purple pleated skirt, one I'd never liked before. My jewelry and makeup were kept simple. Even though I no longer needed to hide my identity as a woman, I could never return to the pampered mindset I'd had as a princess. Before that massacre, I loved bright, elaborate dresses, always paired with extravagant jewelry. One year, at my birthday banquet, I had the palace maids create an especially intricate hairstyle. They pinned a full 9 pairs of gold hairpins into it. Back then I was naive and happy, and I thought life could go on forever. I never expected fate to be so fickle, that all it took was a light nudge one afternoon to stir a monstrous storm through my life. I came back to myself and said softly, "Now I don't have to pretend to be my brother anymore. I've already ordered the wardrobe bureau to rush the making of new dragon robes, and that tomb from back then, the name on the steel can finally be changed to my brother's." As I spoke, I paused. The palace gates were already not far ahead. I turned to Alexandar Wang again. "About what happened on the pleasure boat that day? Are you still angry with me?" I only heard him say that one word. Suddenly the world tipped. Everything seemed to slow, as if someone had smeared the air with a faint, blood-red haze. Through the blur, my eyes caught Alexandar Wang's panicked expression for a heartbeat. Then I sank into endless darkness. Afterward, the physician took my pulse and said my heart meridians had been damaged 3 years ago. I had forced myself to carry an enormous secret for 3 full years. Now that the truth was out and my great vengeance repaid, that last breath finally gave way. But if you recuperate properly, it won't be that severe. You can still live 20 or 30 more years. All the while, Alexandar Wang stood at the bedside listening. Lips pressed tight, his face grim in a way I'd never seen. Only after the physician left did he sit down and gently take my hand where it lay outside the quilt. So that's why, that day on the pleasure boat, you shouted Nolan Ning's name at me? There was a sharpness in his voice, like he was grinding his teeth. I sensibly shook my head. How could it be that? I just thought the truth wasn't settled yet. If I was unlucky and got killed, at least you wouldn't be dragged into it. Then you could marry in peace. I didn't finish. A scorching, fierce kiss sealed the rest of my words. Alexandar Wang gripped my chin, enunciating every word. Vivian Zhao, is that really what you think of me? I've liked you for so many years. You never felt it at all? Countless little details, dormant for years, suddenly snapped into place. That boy who always pulled a long face whenever he saw me sending things to Nolan Ning, was it because he was jealous? I squeezed Alexandar Wang's hand and said softly, Alexandar Wang, when this is completely over, we'll get married. The longer we were together, the more I realized that, for me, Alexandar Wang was someone easy to soothe. The moment he learned I was still alive, his hardness and severity began to melt away, little by little. When we were alone, even in the pleasure behind bed curtains, he was gentle with me. Even though he'd said such harsh things on the pleasure boat that day, later, during the fireworks at the palace banquet, all I had to do was hook his finger under my sleeve and brush my fingertips over his palm a few times. More than half his anger vanished. And now I'd mentioned marriage. In the end, Alexandar Wang left satisfied. I sat in silence for a long time, then had David Lee summon the physician back. The sun had almost sunk beyond the horizon. On my face, only a thin crimson line remained. I heard my own voice, flat, calm. Tell me, how long do I really have? The old physician trembled. Even with careful recuperation, I fear, no more than a little over a year. I understand, I said lightly. This must be kept from everyone else, including the Empress and General Wang. Do you understand? I had known it for a long time. Alexandar Wang and I had no future. After my health improved a little, I began quietly arranging what would happen after my death. 3 years on the throne, working day and night. I had done right by the people of Great Zhou. Before I left this world, I would also arrange Stella and Lucas Lu's marriage, so she would have nothing to worry about. Grand Tutor Pei and Prince Huayan's family were set to be executed in 7 days. Their household servants were all dismissed. Those surviving bandits from back then were tracked down one by one and killed. My father, my mother, and my brother. I had finally avenged them. The only person I wronged was Alexandar Wang. I indulged in passion with him and fed him promises, yet never told him I didn't have long to live. After I issued the decree granting marriage to Stella and Lucas Lu, Alexandar Wang finally brought news of Prince Huayan's whereabouts. After escaping the capital, he went north into the northern frontier's interior. He met up with Liao Kingdom agents and even produced Great Zhao's frontier defense map. The Liao Kingdom launched war outright. After reporting the news, Alexandar Wang asked for permission to lead another expedition to the northern frontier. This time, I'll bring back Prince Huayan's head as the betrothal gift for my proposal. He looked at me, light glittering in his eyes. Vivian Zhou, wait for me to come back, then we'll get married. All right. Smiling, I rose and walked to him. I looped my arms lightly around his neck. When his gaze darkened, I gave him a teasing smile. Marriage can wait until you return, but the wedding night, we can have it tonight, ahead of time. Alexandar Wang's throat bobbed twice. He pulled me tight around the waist. The room brimmed with desire. 3 years ago, when I first learned I didn't have long to live, I had people discreetly search outside the palace. I raised a reliable child and named her Amanda Zhou. At first, when I took her in, I thought she was a boy, until the year she turned 13 and had her first monthly bleeding. I had people teach her to read and write. I had her trained in strategy, in civil and military affairs, and in the art of balance. Everything my brother and I had once studied, I made her study all over again. I had planned it down to the last step. After Alexandar Wang returned to the capital, I would have him gradually become familiar with Amanda. In the future, as a loyal minister and great general, he could continue to assist her in governing Great Zhou, and I would have enough time to say goodbye to him. But I never expected that Alexandar Wang, who at first had been sending one victory report after another, would go missing on the northern frontier battlefield. What happened? The messenger who returned to the capital dropped to his knees before me. Emperor, the Liao Kingdom has our northern frontier defense map. They deliberately set a trap to lure General Wang deep into their territory, then surrounded him. General Wang fought through a bloodbath and broke the encirclement, but he accidentally fell from a cliff. I fear. It's very grim. His words detonated in my ears like thunder. Yet I forced myself to stay calm, my eyes sweeping over the other ministers in the imperial study. As expected, 2 of them were already panicking. One even turned away, at a loss. Emperor, since General Wang is likely lost, and the Liao Kingdom is always brutal, and now they have our defense map, perhaps. So what? I sprang to my feet, staring at the sheen of sweat on his forehead as I shouted. Even if Alexandar Wang is truly dead, Great Zhou's realm still stands. I still stand. There is no possibility of surrendering to traitors and to the Liao Kingdom. If General Wang's death is confirmed, I will lead the campaign personally. I forced myself to have David Li see the ministers out. Then I suddenly spat a mouthful of blood. My vision blurred. Bit by bit, I shook my head hard to stay awake and picked up my brush to write to Stella. By now, she had married into the Chancellor's residence and no longer lived in the inner palace. I wrote to her, telling her I planned to send Amanda to the Chancellor's residence and asking her to look after her for a time. But Stella seemed to sense something. She entered the palace to find me in person. The moment she saw me, she froze. Then she rushed over, grabbed my arm, and cried, "Vivil! Stella, I won't live much longer." My lips were pale as I warned her. "Help me take care of Amanda. I've already drafted the edict to pass the throne to her. Take it out of the palace with you. My condition, don't tell anyone, not even Lucas Liu. I'll claim illness and stop attending court these next few days. If Alexandar Wang still hasn't returned after 7 days, you'll present the edict and have Amanda ascend the throne. Then choose a good seedling from the Wang family's collateral branch and have the old General Wang train him well. Tell him I'm sorry, that Alexandar Wang died in my hatred. But don't be too sad. We knew the outcome 3 years ago. Back then I was so badly injured. You brought many doctors, and they all said I might not live. But I clung to that one breath and I really did survive. For these 3 years, I've never stopped thinking about vengeance, and about Great Zhou's foundations. Now that my great vengeance is repaid, I should go find father, mother, and my brother. In the first 17 years of my life, I only ever liked one person I should not have liked, Nolan Ning. Back then, I thought Alexandar Wang hated me, and I didn't dare go near him. Later, father and mother and my brother died horribly. I had to be careful again, never daring to take a single wrong step until the truth came out and vengeance was done. In the end, the time I shared tenderness with Alexandar Wang amounted to only a few months. Stella cried until her face was streaked with tears. Smiling, I lifted my sleeve and wiped them away for her, then looked at her seriously. "Stella, thank you for saving me. My achievements these 3 years may not be remembered for 1,000 ages. But when the historians write them down, at least they should call me a wise ruler." I went over everything that needed to be said. Then I waved at her. "All right, Stella, take Amanda back with you. I'm going to sleep for a while." I held on for 3 days in the palace. By the evening of the 3rd day, the oil was spent and the flame was guttering. Everything before my eyes was a muddled haze, scattered points of light spinning and drifting. Bracing a hand on the bedrail, I eased myself down. From the small table, I took a camellia, folded it neatly, and set it beside my pillow. That night before Alexandar Wang left the capital, we barely slept. I clung to him, watching his starlit eyes fill with lush desire, and laughed as I looped an arm over his shoulder. "General Wang, do you still want to admire the flowers?" Later, I lost myself, his low voice in my ear again and again telling me he liked me, yet I never gave him a single answer. That day, I'd wanted Stella to bring Alexandar Wang a few more words if he was still alive, so she could tell him for me. But after thinking it over, I let it go. Let him think I'm a liar. A liar who shared one night of passion with him, who fooled him with talk of marriage and would never fulfill it, who never once said that I liked him. If he lives, it's better that he hate me, forget me, and go on with his life. Then he won't have to know what I truly felt. I only regret that I couldn't see him one last time. Alexandar Wang severed Prince Huayan's head, then spurred his horse and rode straight back to the capital. 2 mounts collapsed dead along the way. He barely paused to rest. He had to tell Vivian Zhou it was finally over. They could marry now. Whether she married him or he was brought into her harem, either way was fine. Only a thin thread of sunset lingered as he rode on, the gates of the capital rising in the distance. When Alexandar Wang entered the city, the palace funeral bell had just tolled for the 9th time.